iHeartRadio presents Podversations, a weekly discussion with the biggest names and influencers in podcasting.
Hey, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us for another session of the iHeartPodcast speaker series. For anyone who's watched this in the past, we started this thing about 2.5, 3 years ago when we as a world were moving into a whole new situation, into quarantine. And we wanted to do two things. We wanted to stay a little more connected to each other, even if it was virtual. And we also wanted to keep talking about our favorite topic, podcasting, and the creators that were driving podcasting, jumping into the medium new or who were veterans of it already. So we kicked off this speaker series, and it's become often a lot of weeks. It's my favorite half hour where I get to sit down and talk to creators that I've seen blossom in podcasting or test it new and ask them about where they came from, why they do this medium, and where they're going with it. Today for me is a really special treat. I get to talk to two podcasters and producers and executive producers who I've known for a really long time, who I consider good friends, and who are two of the best producers and storytellers, I think, at work in any medium, very honestly. One is Aaron Mahnke. Aaron Mahnke has been part of the iHeartPodcast network for several years. In fact, goes back even to the Stuff Media podcast network before Stuff Media was acquired by iHeartMedia in around 2018. Aaron hit the scene on podcasting several years ago with a show called Lore. That really is one of those shows that took a medium and just immediately moved it forward 3-4 years, accelerating the kind of stuff you could do in podcasting, the kind of stories you could tell. The other fellow with us today is Matt Frederick. Matt is a very old friend of mine, has been working with me for, Matt, over 10 years, back to the howstuffworks.com days. Incredible storyteller, incredible producer. Matt is behind some of the biggest shows in our medium, period. As a host, he hosts a show called Stuff They Don't Want You to Know. He also executive produces a lot of content and produces a lot of content that Aaron puts out under his slate, the Grim and Mild Network. So first of all, big, long intro, but I want to put it all out there so folks know who we're talking about here today, because it's important to me. Matt, Aaron, thanks for hanging out with me today. For those on the stream today who don't know your origin story, I think it's very cool on many, many levels. On at least one level, it's very cool from the perspective of somebody who was doing a job and decided, I am a creative at heart. I'm going to put tools down and go dive in the deep end of that. How did Lore, the podcast Lore, this mega hit in our industry, how did that start? What's the origin story?
About 15 years ago, I left the world of working for other people, and I started working as a freelance graphic designer. And it was one of those things where during my day job, I did logos for plumbers and, built websites and stuff. And I did that for a good number of years. But sometime around the end of 2014, that was starting to sort of wind down. You use up all your network of referrals and whatnot. And I had been writing fiction in my spare time. I love Stephen King. I love that creepy supernatural thriller sort of space. And my stuff was a lot like that. It was using a lot of New England folklore, legends from the area that I live in, sort of fed into that. I live near Salem. So you think of the Salem witch trials, it's like my backyard, that kind of thing. And I was looking for ways to get my books out there for people. And I thought I'll create a little giveaway. I'll write some historical essays about these cool historical details that are, embedded in my books, and I'll give it away and people will eat it up and they'll want to buy my books. And then I realized that, of course, this was 2014, 2015. It's really hard to hand somebody a PDF and expect them to read it on a tiny little mobile phone. So I almost gave up, and then I decided to grab a microphone and record, I guess, like an audiobook version of it. And I was going to put them in a zip folder, where you can compress the folder into a zip file and then let people download that. That was my plan. But I had a friend listen to the first essay, and he's like, Aaron, there's this thing called podcasting, and storytelling is becoming this thing within podcasting, and you should really give it a try there. So I took about 2 days. I branded it, which is something that I could do.
Yeah, it's always
made a
good to
cover
see.
art, built a website, and launched it as a podcast. And I wish I could say it was instant success. I had 9 downloads that first day. So the bar has always been set very low for me. After that, if I can get more than 9 downloads on a launch, I am doing really well. But it did take off pretty quickly after that. I think maybe because my plans were so humble, right? Like I went into this not expecting anything. I have just been blown away by the response to it. And yeah, that was 7.5 years ago, and a lot's happened since then. Lore is quickly approaching, probably over the next couple of weeks, 400 million downloads. And there are bigger shows out there, but it's a really nice number. It's got a lot of zeros in it, and it feels really good. It was adapted for TV by Amazon Studios for 2 seasons on Amazon Prime. It's published as a 3-book series through Penguin Random House. So it's had some really good. I've ticked off a few boxes, which has been really great.
I'm going to come back to some of the stuff you just said, but before I go to you, Matt, let me go all the way back to you as a kid. Where did this come from? Like a lot of us as kids read Stephen King. A lot of us as kids and teenagers are interested in dark fringe, scary stuff, but there's definitely something unique about you, about Aaron Mahnke. There is something unique that made you this world-class storyteller. Where did that come from initially? That bug? Was it somebody who inspired you as a kid? Why do you think differently?
I'm going to guess that all of us grew up going to school and getting those little newsprint color catalogs from Scholastic that they'd send us home with. My kids still bring them home today. The smell of the ink, the feel of the paper, it's almost Pavlovian. I want to order from them anyway, even though I don't know what's in them. But I was like 5th grade. I brought one of those home, and there was a book in there of, I don't know what it was called. I could picture the cover, but it was basically weird but true stories from history. And I thought, oh, that's cool. And I convinced my parents to buy it for me. And it had, stories of like a farmer in Tennessee who his family watched him walk across a field and then disappear right before their eyes and never come back. And, the place where he vanished from left a circle in the cornfield and all these weird things. And I think at that moment, it really just sparked something inside me that said, wow, the real and the weird can sort of connect together. So my upbringing growing up in the 80s into the 90s, through middle school, high school, college, it was filled with things like Unsolved Mysteries, the X-Files, Twilight Zone. All of those were key players for me. Publications like Ripley's Believe It or Not, or even radio personalities from back in the day, like Paul Harvey with his Rest of the Story. All of those things where you want to get across a really cool story, and you need to do it in a very unique way. And all those were right there teaching me.
Matt, let's go to you for a sec. Where did you get this bug? I mean, I've seen you do a lot of different kinds of creativity, communication, however we want to bucket it, from writing to video to now podcasting. Way back, Matt, as a kid, teenager, wherever it hit, what prompted you to say, actually, I want to tell stories?
I was a very religious young man, very, very religious. And when my life kind of took a bit of a different path for a while there, I wanted to explore like why I believed what I believed. That's really what it was. Like, why did I go through my life so certain that I knew everything, right? And then right in my face came, well, maybe you don't know everything. And then I just want to decide, what do I know? And that's why those fringe topics just became so fascinating to me. And it doesn't hurt when your dad like sits you down to watch X-Files too. And you start learning that as, 12-year-old boy, and you're like, oh man, there really are UFOs. Oh, Dad, this is too much, but I kind of like it. I want to say one thing on Aaron, specifically Aaron. I think look, I've been thinking about you and like why you're so special in this space to me. I think there's something so disarming about the way you speak. I don't expect you to be telling me the darkest, creepiest, most messed up things in history. For some reason, when your voice is so soothing and you articulate so well, and then all of a sudden we're in like this, vampires are here. I love it.
It's a really good point, and sometimes we overlook it. We spend 95% of the conversation talking about the research and the work and the words, as opposed to you're right, the tonality of your delivery and voice, Aaron, is as unique and I think as important to the content as, Ira Glass and This American Life. It just becomes like intertwinable, inextricable with the actual content. And you're right, it's disarming is the right word, I think, Matt, because it's like you expect it to be more like, oh, this is going to be a very informative and educate. Wait, who killed what? That's how it all. That's how it all
Exactly
sort of comes across. But
well, it's interesting that you say that, because I've been getting emails from listeners for almost 8 years now. And one of the recurring themes through all these emails that I get is that a lot of people use lore as sort of an ASMR show, right? It's this show that they press play as they go to bed at night. I think I just read like 3 tweet replies overnight last night from people who said, I press play and I go to bed, and like that's how they relax at the end of the day. And I can see, good classical music from Chad Lawson, who is, he's a Billboard #1 classical pianist. That helps. That makes sense. Calm voice, yes, it makes sense. But yeah, when you take that turn toward a vampire or a serial killer, it really does make you question, how relaxing is this stuff really?
Well, think about the dreams you're incepting in those people. That's incredible.
Yeah.
I think we know now why we have a mental health crisis in this country is because Aaron Mahnke is putting everyone
in the
dreams.
It's
called it. I want to talk more seriously though about the role of this. I think different perspective on history, if you could call it that, and I think it is that. You did a show called Lore. You followed it up with a show called Cabinet of Curiosities, but also a show called Unobscured. Unobscured is one of my favorite podcasts ever put out in the world. And I think it's all in the title. It's sort of taking well-worn historical topics and trying to come at them from a different angle to unobscure what you might not know about them. You started out with the Salem witch trials, which you live near, the location where that went down. Suffice it to say, we've been through a tough 2, 3, 4 years of history. There are a roster of reasons why. In our country, around the world, we're going through it still. Is this an important role that you feel you play in any way, shape, or form, where you're like, look, this isn't just for fun. Yes, lore is cool, it's tantalizing. All the shows I make have that sort of edgy, naughty, but super smart vibe to them, scary in a sense. But it's also mildly important because it's stuff that I genuinely don't think yet. Does this ever run through your head, or where do you come from with that?
I don't think it did at the beginning, but it certainly has, like you said, over the last, 2, 3, 4 years, it's become a little bit more of a thing in the back of my brain. It doesn't change the content I make, but it does affect sort of the responsibility that I feel about this. I think that we're really good in a bad way as a culture at reducing history down to a 1-sentence soundbite or a fact that anybody who has any level of education can rattle off on social media. Like, it's easy to misunderstand stuff. And, on a really not so important level, a good example is something like, tell somebody about the Salem witch trials. They will probably tell you, oh yeah, that's when that town ate that moldy bread and they all had hallucinations and went nuts. That idea of the ergot, the poisoned bread, was proposed in like 1976. I think it was 76. It was an active theory for 1 month, and then it was debunked a month later in a scholarly publication. But that 1 month presented the world with an easy soundbite. Moldy bread, that explains it all, right? And that's how we like to see history. We like to see it reduced down to something that's easy to explain, when it really wasn't. It was a whole bunch of other things that are too complicated to fit into a tweet. And so, yeah, Unobscured is one of those shows where we really said, like, look, let's back up and just take our time and go deep into this thing so people can understand context. And I think that at the end of the day, that's what all my shows are about. They're about the context of history. Context is so important. It's the 3D glasses for a 3D movie. If you sit in the theater without 3D glasses, it looks weird, but when you put them on, everything starts to come together. And I think that if you can bring in the context about things, the whys, the hows, all of a sudden history begins to make more sense, and it becomes more dramatic and entertaining too.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the show we're here to talk about today, but anyone listening, watching should definitely take the weekend or two and listen to the several seasons now of Unobscured, but start with that first one. It's shockingly familiar.
Yes.
That what went down and how that sort of thing continues to go down year after year in the United States. You mentioned 3D. I want to pick up on it. You guys have both experimented as you've both moved from being hosts or just quote unquote talent to actual executive producers, certainly producers, but executive producers of shows too. In that move, you both partnered on a show called 13 Days of Halloween. It involves 3D or binaural audio. Matt, give us just a 2-3 minute primer on what the heck is binaural audio, what's sometimes called 3D audio. How do you capture it? Why? What does it do that's different? Where'd it come from? Everything you know on it, which is a decent amount. Tell folks about it.
It's really simple to think about. It's stereo audio that's enhanced in a way to really make your ears feel like the sounds are entering your ears the way they would if you were just hearing them in an environment. So like if you're sitting in a house and you're listening to this and you hear a door open behind you, the way binaural audio is recorded, it would sound like there is a door opening behind you, no matter where you're listening to it. If you're walking on the street and you've got headphones on, there's a door behind you. Oh, you're pretty sure, because your brain, it tricks your brain into thinking you are in a space, because we're so used to having our ears tell us where we are in space, in time, right? It's just pretty incredible stuff. There are these mics that have silicone ears on them that we use. It's kind of weird, but it's incredible.
The microphones alone literally look like a human ear in order to capture the sounds. You can play with it really, really extremely in post. I think in its best, well, in its certainly scariest version, 3D audio will really startle you into thinking that you're just immersed right into the center of a story. Hanging with you for a sec, this anthology of 13 Days of Halloween, first season, why did that feel like it was right for this tech?
Well, like most great ideas that we have, they start with you, Conal. And you, I'm just playing. But it really is a conversation about, we're learning about.
To be clear, we're definitely going to keep that part.
Don't cut that. Yeah,
whatever you do, just keep that.
Well, we wanted to just find a way to tell compelling stories with this technology that we were, learning about, experimenting with, and we thought, man, scaring somebody would be really effective with this, or at least making someone feel uneasy. So we came up with this concept of 13 Days of Halloween, where it's one character that leads you as the listener through this strange place and introduces you to really storytellers, other characters who are going to tell you a story that will hopefully unsettle you and wrap it up with a nice little arc. And thankfully we got, I don't know how this happened, again, deferring back to you, Conal, we got Keegan-Michael Key to play the caretaker, the main character in that first season. And wow, he just blew it out of the water.
It was crazy.
He did. And going back to that microphone for this binaural audio that looks like a human ear, I have vivid memories of being on Zoom, because we recorded this in Zoom, not with Zoom, but we used Zoom to communicate with each other, recorded on microphones, and watching Keegan-Michael Key like lean in and whisper into the side of an ear. And then, okay, let's try that again. And he would kind of come at it from a different angle, and, all these different things he was saying, because he was, at one point in the script, he was pushing you in a wheelchair. So he was standing directly behind you. And it's just a really different experience watching somebody like whispering weird things into a plastic ear, and then hearing it on the audio actually sound like he is sitting on your shoulder right here, only speaking in this direction. It's amazing.
That is nuts. That is nuts. How did you decide, Aaron, with Matt too, but Aaron, how did you guys decide what got the green light, what stories and writers got the green light to be included in the anthology season 1 and 2? How does that process go?
I mean, some of it is just, we all read it and said, that feels good, that doesn't feel good. The filter was a lot more open on the first season because our model for the first season was, let's make this very anthology style. You could, in a sense, pick up in any episode and not feel like you were missing something. You weren't like mid-series. Every one of them was mostly a short story that was narrated by a voice actor, with tiny little bits of wrapper around the beginning and the end to tie that plot thread through all the episodes. But honestly, you could drop in episode 10 and listen all the way to 13 and still feel like you got it. So for the first season, I think it was a little bit easier to make those choices. Do you agree, Matt?
Yeah, we had a construct of a large house, like a manor, right? So we thought, okay, what are all the spaces in that property that we would visit if we were going on some weird Halloween tour, right? So then we tried to pick out stories that would match up with, let's say, the sunroom or the solarium, right? Or what's going to take place in the cellar. It was pretty cool in that way. And the other thing is, though, with 13 Days of Halloween, it is designed, like Aaron said, to drop in whenever you want to. If you just catch a couple, you're still going to be entertained, but it rewards people fully if you listen to the whole thing, because that arc really does pay off in the finale on Halloween every time. It
does. And I think that it took us making the first season to really realize that there was there was a payoff that came with all 13 episodes. And so season 2, we tried adding a bit more to that wrapper that was around the stories. And so the thread that tied all the episodes together started to contain like its own larger story. Like there were, minor stories and major stories, and each of them fed into that. And then, obviously for this year, we're doing our 3rd season of that. And I think we've leaned even harder in that direction. Don't you agree, Matt? Like we have said, you know what, let's just really try to make all of these very interconnected, and you've got to start with number 1 to work your way to 13 for that really big payoff.
Yeah. Season 2 had Kathy Najimy from Hocus Pocus, which is getting its sequel right now. That's exciting for everybody. I can't wait to watch that. And also had Bethany Ann Lind. She was in there. So it was like 2 characters we're following as they go on a journey. Yeah. And this third season, we're going very Spielberg with it. And we're going to follow a boy and his dog as they journey home on Devil's Night during like the Great Depression. Again, we're trying to make it feel like, oh, what's going on around us in the real world? Oh, let's tell a story that's kind of like that.
That is so cool. God, that is so cool. It feels like we always try to do this, but it feels like we're building this huge monster franchise IP. Like it feels like it always felt like a big idea, I think, to all of us, even before we'd recorded a minute of sound. But to be on season 3, perfectly timed for October. Everyone needs to listen to this before and on Halloween. If you have a Halloween party, don't play music, play this. Like, come on, just don't be dumb, guys. So
Josh Clark, Don't Be Dumb, video series on YouTube.
Don't be dumb. But we talked a lot there about sort of like telling stories in audio only, trying to immerse somebody in audio only. And back to you, Aaron, you've dabbled is not even the right word. Like Lore became an audiovisual property on Prime Video while it was still a podcast. And it may be an obvious question, but like, is that hard to be like, okay, now I've got to figure out how to visualize this thing that I was fully relying on the theater of the mind to get me there. And 13 Days of Halloween, once again, like same sort of challenges. It's an incredibly scary visual show without the sight and motion of the sight, sound, and motion equation. How do you think about that in your head?
I think that there are the natural, obvious places where audio is lacking. There's no picture. There's no ability to just show a person to the audience and say, like, this is what this person looks like. You can now recognize them. It's easy. There's no set design. There's no visual effects, that sort of thing. But I'm of the opinion that the best movies, especially on the scary side, are the ones that hide the thing that you're supposed to be afraid of, or maybe the thing that you're anticipating. It's hidden away. You don't see it. I mean, one of my favorite movies is The Village from M. Night Shyamalan. And the actual monsters in that fictional world have such a tiny percentage of screen time. It's minuscule, but they're always present because they're built into the culture of this community. They're built into the dialogue, into their fears. It's all there. So I think for audio, that's really the plus side of things, that we don't have the luxury of just doing a jump scare where something falls out of the closet. Like we don't have to show you the monster. We have to build it into the voices and the words of the character, with subtle sound effects and whatnot. And, for a tight little show like 13 Days of Halloween, that is so important. And you need to be able to do it consistently across all the 13 episodes without slipping or disappointing the audience. Like it has its own challenge. And I think that nets a really unique reward.
Matt, I mean, you started out, at least one of the things you did earlier career was video. What's that been like, where now you're sort of like strip all those tools away, solely rely on, again, this idea of theater of the mind, freeing or limiting or a little bit of both?
For me, it's one of the best things that ever happened, because often with a camera, you are limited depending on the money that you have. Unless you're like our friend Dan Bush, who is just extremely good at making something out of nothing. Like, he can just do that. And that's magic. And I don't quite have that level of skill. But with audio, I can conjure anything. And I can, instead of having to show it to you, I can make you see it by thinking about it and by hearing it, especially with this 3D audio, hearing it in a specific place in your mind. And I mean, to me, I don't know. It really just brings the magic to a medium that for so long, at least in my mind, was just people talking on a microphone.
Yeah.
And now we can bring an actor, like in season 3 of 13 Days of Halloween, we've got Clancy Brown. Clancy Brown, like, if you don't know who that is, I don't know. I always throw out things like Carnival and Shawshank Redemption, Highlander. I mean, these are like movies and characters that really shaped me that he played. But the kids, like my son, knows him because he plays Mr. Krabs on SpongeBob. But like, this is an actor, like a real actor. And he's bringing things to this sonic medium that are just super special. I just couldn't be happier with it.
It's funny, like even indie directors, like you mentioned Dan Bush, that you and I are fans of his stuff. Like, even he's jumping into podcasting because I think he finds it so freaking freeing to run and gun fast in a medium that's audio only. He did Tomorrow's Monsters. He's got a show coming up soon too. That'll be awesome. But I want to do the business side of this for just a second. You have a medium that's exploding in growth. You have 80 million Americans a week listening to podcasts now. That's 1 out of 3 or so Americans. Like, it's the newest mass reach medium in the United States. What is tracking with that is the investment, the advertising piece of this, that's going to make this accelerate and grow even bigger. Aaron, you work extremely well with brands and advertisers. And I think the reason that you do is because you sort of stay true to what makes the podcast ad product unique and awesome. And I don't want that to get overlooked here because it's the other half of our business. Maybe just talk about that for a sec. The relationship with fans, why ads work in podcasting in ways that I don't think they do in other mediums as well. What's your experience been like?
Well, I think it comes down to trust, honestly. And I know that you and I have had this conversation like the off tape before, and it's a common industry conversation, but all the experimenting with, canned pre-recorded ads that get dynamically inserted versus, talk shows where people grab a piece of paper and they just read the script for 5 minutes. I think all of it is proving a harder truth. And that's that host-read ads have always been, and I think they always will be, the most effective way to connect a listener to a sponsor. And when they're done right, and by that I mean when ad reads are treated with respect by the host, when they're produced in the same mood or the style as the episode's regular content, when the listener's experience is actually taken into consideration instead of just getting ad copy across and hitting hitting the points that you're supposed to hit. When all of those things are done right, I think the listener won't feel like they've been shilled to or sold out. So podcast ads should always give off that vibe of a partnership, that it's a trusted individual saying, here's a thing that I personally enjoy that I think would really fit your life as well. And sadly, I don't think any amount of technology can make that better. So right now, I feel like we're in a world where the podcast industry is exploring all those technological tools. They're saying, well, what if this works? Maybe this will work better. And at the end of the day, when it's all said and done, we're all going to come back and say, you know what? Post-read ads were the best, and we probably shouldn't have walked away from that. So
it's hard to make something awesome better. I agree. Let me ask you guys both just a future trip for a sec to close us out. Where we see this medium in 1, 5, 10 years, what do you think is a blind spot that listeners might have? Like today we see genres like fiction continuing to grow. There are whole genres that still aren't huge in podcasting, like travel. There are technologies like 3D audio that we weren't even really serious about until 24 months ago or so. You both are, I think, rightfully so pretty excited about the medium, but Matt, I'll start with you. We look out 5, 10 years. What keeps you really excited about this medium? What do you think we are then?
Oh man. Sometimes it's tough for, I don't want to speak for you, but for guys like us who are executive producing a lot of shows, right? Often we've got our nose to the grindstone. We're just making stuff happen. We're thinking about the next 2 or 3 shows while we're making, the previous 5 or the ones that are ongoing right now. When I think about the future, man, we're seeing such growth, right? Like such growth with the number of podcasts, with the number of influential people that are wanting to get into this medium. It does feel like that's a trend that's going to continue. But what I'm really interested in seeing are these bigger names, and let's say an actor coming on and wanting to make their own thing, right? So a lot of times it's a producer or writer that's coming up with a concept or an idea, and then they, hire an actor or go out and cast an actor for that. I think there's going to be more people realizing, like people on the creative side, that they can make their own thing. And it's going to be John Hamm comes out with his own, like this thing that he created on his own, right? I mean, I think that is going to be happening. Similar to the way we worked with Will Ferrell, right? To create an entire thing. And he had this character and he just brought this whole world to podcasting.
Aaron, what about you? You look out 1, 5, whatever time range you're thinking, where would you like the medium to be? Or at least where do you see it?
Well, I mean, I think it's still a real low barrier type of content to make. And that's good, right? I think that anybody with a mic and some patience can start a podcast, whether they are a celebrity like Matt said, or they're, somebody who's a graphic designer writing novels in their spare time. Like, you got a mic and some patience, I think you can figure this out. That doesn't guarantee success, but you can make a show. But I think that growth is also going to push us into a bit more segmentation. It used to be that if you wanted a break from listening to like a true crime podcast, there were a couple of fiction shows and you could probably go over there, listen to all of their episodes, and then come back a month later and pick back up in true crime. Like, there wasn't a lot to dip into. But now those categories are getting really big. And they're getting too big to treat like an afterthought. So you mentioned fiction. Fiction has really come into its own, even getting picked up for television, just like other categories have in the past. And I think that's also a space where a lot of the Hollywood talent have discovered a new place to work without the investment or the time spent in like managing the row show. They can show up in a booth in a recording studio and they can perform like they always perform, but on audio only. Honestly, in the end, and I don't know if this is 10 years out or 15 years out or whatever, but I think we're going to go back. We're going to look back in a decade and we're going to see this podcast landscape has started to look a lot like the cable TV world of today or a decade ago. Dozens of highly specific genre related networks that are producing show after show that like aligns to their own specific mandates. This is the kind of show we make. This is the world we play in. All while growing massive audiences who see them as a one-stop shop for that kind of content that they want to get. I don't know what that means. Sometimes I have these visions of like the indie record industry in the 60s and 70s and 80s where people are like, photocopying their album covers and sticking them in a cassette tape and handing them out, like total punk. And I think that we've passed that stage with podcasting. We're probably getting to the point now where all these little tiny production companies are just going to become absorbed into, half a dozen big publishers. And we've got these content channels that are all genre specific. And there's goods and bads to that. But I kind of think that's where it'll go, because that's what I feel like that's the well-worn rut that capitalism wants things to go in. So that might be cynical, it might not be, but that's what I see.
I don't think so. I think, look, as long as, very honestly, as long as there's creators like you guys still at work, we will still be listening. It's just been, very honestly, over the last 5, 10, 15 years, it's been pretty awesome to see these shows that you guys have built and put out into the world. I think they've obviously changed and accelerated the growth of podcasting. I think it's more fundamental. I think they've actually sort of changed how humans think about storytelling. And so I really do deeply, deeply appreciate the partnership with iHeart and the time today to just hang out and talk to you guys about it. Everybody should tools down, listen to 13 Days of Halloween season 3. It'll scare you to the bone. It's also really, really smart, technologically smart, storytelling wise. It's smart. It's a show to reckon with.
I just want to point out Alex Williams, who is not with us on this panel today. He couldn't make it. He's feeling under the weather. But season 3 of 13 Days of Halloween is really his brainchild. He's been writing. He's been out in LA recording it and directing it. So Alex Williams, look him up if you don't know who he is. He's awesome. He's another producer, creator, host.
One of the best podcast producers at work. Partners with Matt on producing a bunch of Aaron's stuff. Alex, we hope you feel better.
Yeah, definitely.
You better be better by the time this airs, or we'll have a problem.
Yeah.
I really, really appreciate it, Aaron, Matt. Thank you guys for talking to me today.
Podversations is a production of iHeartRadio. You can find more from the biggest names in podcasting on the iHeartRadio app or wherever you get your podcasts.